Great. I want to thank everyone for coming today to our horse talk. My name is Chris Kaman. I'm the founder and president of Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates. As most of you know, in December of 2022, Theodore Roosevelt National Park announced their plans to eliminate the entire herd of horses from the park. Right now, that's about 190 horses that'll lose their home. So we've started these horse talks as a way to just raise awareness, not only about our horses, but wild horses everywhere. So we've been kind of leading the fight on this to save these horses, and there's a lot we've accomplished and a lot more work to do. So today I'm very honored to have Scott Beckstead with us. I had the pleasure of meeting Scott while we were in Washington, D.C. at the Save Our Wild Horses conference. Most of you know Scott from social media and his Wild Horse Wednesdays for sure. Here's a little bit more information about Scott. After receiving his bachelor's degree from Utah State University and his JD from the University of Utah, Scott worked as an attorney in private practice in Central Oregon before going to work full-time in the animal protection sector. During that time, he also served as the mayor of Waldport, Oregon from 2002 to 2007. He became known for his special expertise in the field of animal law and has taught that subject at the University of Oregon and Wilmette University Law Schools. In 2000, he co-authored Animal Law, the first casebook on the subject, and continues to teach animal law, wildlife law and policy, and Endangered Species Act as an adjunct professor of law at Wilmette University. Because of his close familiarity with horses, livestock, and farm animals, Scott provides training to law enforcement agencies on how to handle and work with those animals and how to investigate equine and livestock cruelty and neglect. Scott will be talking to us today about the new documentary, Wild Beauty, Mustang Spirit of the West, and why every wild horse advocate should be using this as part of their toolkit. We do have everyone muted. If you have a question, we ask that you type it in the chat and we'll get to those as we can. Scott, did you want me to start with the trailer to the movie first and then we'll start talking. So welcome, Scott. Thank you to everyone who's here. And let's see if I can do two things at once. I think first of all. Okay, so if you haven't seen that movie yet, it's definitely something you need to see. Let me stop my. So Scott, I will turn it over to you.
I didn't hear any sound. Was the sound going for everyone but me?
I hope everybody heard the sound. So I heard it, but it was on my computer. So I hope that everybody heard the sound. If not, I will also, when we share this, I will put the link, but you can also Google Wild Beauty Foundation or Wild Beauty, and you'll find the movie. But so I'll turn it over to you, Scott, and you can talk about the movie and what's been happening and just why this is really something great for everyone's wild horse toolkit.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's an honor and a privilege to be joining you today. And I want to start just by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to you and your team at Chasing Wild Horses for the exemplary work that you guys are doing to save the horses of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. I think there is so much that all of us advocates can learn from you in the way that you have so skillfully both raised awareness as well as done the hard work of putting together support from, from especially within North Dakota, getting all of the stakeholders aligned, which, as you know, in the wild horse space can be very, very daunting work to try and get everyone on the same page. So let me just start there with heartfelt thanks, and I will also say that the horses of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park are featured in the film. There are snippets of the horses, and there's especially footage of the wild horses grazing with the bison, with the point being that these are large native ungulates that belong on the North American landscape, and that are vital to ecosystems. It's time, for a game changer in this conversation. We fighting for wild horses have been on the defense for so long, and we are facing this sort of political juggernaut comprised of the federal government, the livestock industry, and an American media that frankly has utterly failed to call out, especially the Bureau of Land Management, for its disinformation campaign that is designed to mislead both the American people and Congress on the reality facing our wild horses. And I think we have tried so hard to come up with a narrative to combat that disinformation campaign. And I think it's going to take the work of people like Ashley Avis, but also the wild horse photographers, the artists, the musicians, the actors and the celebrities. I think that they are going to be absolutely critically important to finally confront this false disinformation campaign by the Bureau of Land Management and the livestock industry, and get things turned around. I mean, because, let's face it, the only hand on the brake, so to speak, that can really stop the disastrous policies of the BLM is Congress. Congress needs to be that hand on the brake. And right now, they are being, fed a whole litany of lies. And, in part, it's fueled by what is known as the path forward. The path forward is a deal that was cut by the national humane groups, especially the Humane Society of the United States and ASPCA. They made this agreement with the beef industry and big ag, to basically justify these mass roundups and the mass depopulation of wild horses from their designated habitats across the American West. And if you're a member of Congress and you are, you've got 1,000 things to think about, 1,000 issues that you're having to deal with, everything from the debt ceiling to the war in Ukraine to, election issues and democracy, all those things. If someone comes to you with the wild horse issue and you see on the one hand, the Humane Society or ASPCA calling for more roundups and the beef industry calling for more wild horse roundups, it's very easy as a member of Congress to say, well, I guess that settles it there because we've got both sides of the issue supporting the same thing. And, the wild horse advocates, the wild horse groups, and the individuals working to save wild horses were completely locked out of the conversation that led to the path forward. And yet we are the ones left to deal with the consequences of this catastrophe. We are the ones that are out there watching the roundups and documenting the inhumanity and the animal abuse and the lies of the Bureau of Land Management. And we are the ones that are scrambling to pull as many BLM horses and burros out of the slaughter pipeline as we can. I mean, these big national groups sort of lit the fuse and created this catastrophe, leaving the wild horse advocates out, and yet now we're the ones that are out there trying to deal with the consequences. And meanwhile, those big national groups are just standing by, watching it happen, and going to Congress and lobbying for more. So it is a very, very difficult spot that we and the American wild horse and burro are in. And, you know, faced with that political juggernaut, it is a David versus Goliath situation. That's a line from my good buddy Marty Irby. He says that in the movie in Wild Beauty. He says it's a David and Goliath situation, and it absolutely is. We are the underdogs. The wild horses are the underdogs. But you know, we all know how things turned out for Goliath. He went down, and he went down hard. And I think that if I continue that metaphor, this film may be that stone in the sling that finally takes down the political juggernaut. So we are in a very tough place, but we are absolutely 100% on the right side of this issue. I think that history will bear out that we are on the right side of this issue. I would far rather be fighting for wild horses than fighting for the beef industry, with all of its lies and its corruption and its cruelty and its greed. So I'm thrilled to be part of this movie. It was an absolute honor, one of the honors of my lifetime, being asked to participate as a featured expert in this movie, and being part of this team that put together this incredible film, which of course it exposes the political side and the government side of the wild horse issue, but it also includes Ashley Avis's unique artistic vision. I mean, she has got such a way with a camera and the images that she captures, and her way of telling the story and describing what the audience is seeing is just unparalleled. And that's why I think the film has been winning so many awards at the film festival. That's why it has such a strong rating with Rotten Tomatoes, and that's why every time I have attended a screening or a film festival featuring the movie, every single time the audience is incredibly moved. They are inspired by the beauty of the wild horses and their habitats as depicted in the film, but they are also outraged. And without exception, every member of the audience in every screening that I've been to has wanted to know what they can do to help, how they can get involved. And so that's why I think this movie is so important. It's going to appeal to so many people and hopefully get a lot of people to reach out and let their members of Congress know that they want to change.
So can you talk about, we were talking a little bit beforehand, but if you could talk about now, there is going to be a congressional screening of this movie. I know you don't have exact dates or things that have changed a little bit, but can you talk about that? Because that's something that we've been including in our emails as we're doing follow-ups from the DC trip still. But like you said, letting Congress know.
Yeah, Congress, it's important for the American taxpayer to see this movie, but it's also incredibly important for Congress to see this movie. And I think that, I have had, dozens and dozens of meetings with members of Congress on the wild horse issue. And you would be surprised how many members of Congress just simply either have no idea that there are even wild horses in the American West, or they don't know what is happening to them. And again, when they find out, they are uniformly outraged. This is an absolute bipartisan issue. Whether you are a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, there are 1,000 reasons to object to what our federal government is doing. If you're a Republican who cares about responsible government, fiscal responsibility, taxpayer accountability, bureaucratic honesty and transparency, and all of those things that are strong, principles for conservative Republicans. This is right up your alley. And if you are a Democrat who cares about all of those things, but who also cares about protecting our natural environment, and animal welfare and all of those things, then of course there are 1,000 reasons for Democrats to like this. And very often those interests coincide regardless of political party. This is one point that I often make, is that it doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal or progressive or whatever. If you love animals, you love animals. And if you care about good government, you care about good government. And it doesn't matter what your party affiliation is. And so we have found that there is, Republicans are waking up to this issue. Democrats are waking up to this issue. But again, this movie has so much potential. So yeah, we had originally had a date set early in June for a screening. The logistics, however, are proving very challenging. So now I think we're looking for sometime later in the month. But we will be having a screening for members of Congress and others in Washington, D.C. The plan is to include a rally that people can attend to call on the Bureau of Land Management to stop the mass roundups. And I think it's going to be hugely consequential. And the hope is that it helps to turn the debate around in the halls of Congress, and maybe we can finally get some key members of Congress to start asking all the right questions of the Bureau of Land Management and the Department of Interior, because so far, they have just turned they've turned a deaf ear to those of us who care about wild horses and public lands. They have just kind of decided to tune us out. But they can't tune out Congress, because Congress holds their purse strings. Right. So, so the hope is that we get good engagement from members of Congress, and maybe this results in some serious review of the Bureau of Land Management's Wild Horse and Bureau program.
So I know that this movie is primarily about the BLM, but I know, and it's all the Department of the Interior, I recognize a lot of the language and the narrative from the BLM on what we're dealing with the Park Service. And I'm sure people will say the same thing about the Forest Service. So it really is a movie for wild horses everywhere, no matter which one it is. It's bringing the Department of the Interior in whichever branch is underneath there. So I think that that's important to consider. We get told a lot out here too. The horses make people emotional. You get too emotional when we talk about the horses. And so hearing those lines in the movie, and a lot of people have messaged me and said, this is exactly what we're hearing. And it's like, yeah, it is. It doesn't matter. It's all the same agency.
I would say this. There's an article in the Los Angeles Times today about the fact that some horses died in California during that's the wild horses that died on public lands, in the terrible winter that we just had. It's to be expected that when you have a severe winter, you're going to lose animals. I mean, in states like Wyoming, they lost huge numbers of pronghorn and deer and elk. But the bad thing is that the Forest Service in that LA Times story is using those dead horses to suggest that maybe there needs to be fewer horses, as though the fact that many have died because of the winter isn't doing that already. But now they're saying, oh, it's so sad that these horses, died because of the winter. Maybe there shouldn't be so many horses. And it's just like, so the federal government is going to spin every single opportunity that comes along to justify getting rid of wild horses and discounting the wishes of the American people. And we just have to stay at it with the kind of work that you're doing, Chris, and your group. And with things like, this film that's coming out. There are other films that have been made that explore some of these issues. And again, I think that it's going to be these kinds of creative undertakings that are going to have a major impact on the conversation.
I think too, like you said, the artistic way that Ashley put the movie together really, it's not me telling you what's happening or us telling our congressman, hey, you need to look into this. It's a very good visualization of what's happening. So it really it's an amazing movie. So we will be showing it during our rally that we're going to have in July. So I'm happy to hear that. So we're working out the details with Ashley for that. So we're hoping to get some more awareness raised here in North Dakota. Um, I don't know if anyone, I don't know if you have anything else to add about the movie, but so what are ways that people can use this as part of their advocacy of this movie?
Well, you know, first of all, make sure and watch it. That's the first thing. If you haven't already seen the movie, it is a beautiful movie, but it does have, you know, it does have footage from the roundups and footage from the holding facilities that you know, is you know, can be you know, hard to watch in spots, but it needs to be seen. But encourage, you know, everyone that you know to see this movie, especially if there's someone who cares about animals, who cares about public lands and wildlife, or who cares about you know, our government being accountable to the taxpayers. And then the other thing that you can do is share the trailer for Wild Beauty on all your social media with the hashtag I stand with wild horses, and tag your members of Congress. That's both of your United States senators and your US representative, so that it gets seen by them as well. And I think that if enough of us get that message out there, eventually Congress starts waking up and starts asking all the right questions.
I think that the movie also helps curb some of the, and we talked about this, I know in Washington DC a lot of the misinformation coming out of the BLM. I mean, there's some points in that movie that like just can't be argued. You know, I mean, this is you saying what you're saying and it's on video. So I think it helps curb some of that misinformation also, and that strengthens our toolkits as well.
I think you're right. I think that there is the you know, Ashley did a really good job of documenting from government sources, for example, how much money is being paid to those helicopter contractors to round up horses, and how much money is being paid to owners of off-range facilities. And you know, and I discuss in the part where I'm featured in the movie, you know, the fact that you've got a food company, Idaho-based JR Simplot. And you know, I'm an Idaho native. I was born and raised in Twin Falls, Idaho, and JR Simplot was sort of, you know, that's Idaho's pride. It's a homegrown company, but it's now a massive, sprawling food company, and it grazes cattle on public lands at taxpayer expense on the front end, and on the back end it gets paid by the Bureau of Land Management to hold on to thousands of wild horses that have been removed from public lands. And just, I mean, just the optics of a food company holding on to thousands of wild horses, when we know that there are forces out there calling for these animals to be slaughtered and turned into food. It's something that should obviously concern all of us. So it is very important to spread the word about the movie. You know, share the trailer on your social media, hashtag I stand with wild horses, tag your members of Congress, and just spread the word far and wide. And let's get this movie seen by as many people as we can.
I think even in the emails that people are sending to their members of Congress, sharing the trailer with them that way too, and just letting them know to be on the lookout for the congressional screening in June would also be helpful.
That's absolutely right. And if folks are, you know, especially if they're on the East Coast and you're inclined to come join us at the rally, obviously that would be huge. But again, we're working on a date later in the month of June, and once that date is arrived at and all the logistics are set, then we'll blast it out. And really looking forward to a great event.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Scott? I didn't see anything come up in the chat, but I think that I think you're right. The movie is incredible, and I think everyone needs to see it. I know we watched it when we were in Washington DC, and I've watched it again with my family since we've been back home, and it's upsetting, but yeah, you need to see it and need to understand exactly what's happening. It's our tax dollars. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think that uh, that's why I think, especially anyone who cares about taxpayer accountability and responsible government should be deeply concerned about what's going on. And it has often occurred to me that an auditing agency like the Office of Inspector General or the General Accounting Office, should come along and do a top to bottom assessment of the BLM's Wild Horse and Burro program, looking at every angle, looking at how it spends its money, looking at the information that it's putting out there to the public, um, you know, looking at the entire program, how animals are being treated, looking at the mass die-offs at holding facilities like Canyon City in Colorado and Wheatland in Wyoming. The fact that horses just kind of disappear and the BLM has no answer, and by no answer means they just flat out refuse to answer. Here in Oregon, we have a very popular, very colorful herd of horses in the South Steens Mountains out in southeastern Oregon. Beautiful herd of horses that includes many cremellos. Those are those creamy colored horses with the blue eyes and the pink skin. And the BLM killed 11 cremellos during the roundup last summer. And why did the BLM kill those cremellos? Because they're cremellos. And they have never explained why they killed those animals. Ostensibly, the thought is that they believe that they might be more prone to eye cancer because of the lack of pigment around their eyes, something that veterinarians will tell you is absolute hogwash. But on top of the 11, and by the way, those 11 horses that the BLM killed were healthy, fine. One of them was a yearling cremello. But in addition to those 11 cremellos that the Bureau of Land Management just killed in cold blood, there are 8 other cremellos, all of them popular, well-known, named, loved, that are gone, missing. They're not in holding, and they're not out on the range. And advocates have sent public records requests to the BLM asking what happened to those 8 cremellos. Crickets, absolute crickets. The BLM does not take kindly to being called out on the things that it does, and if you ask the wrong questions, it'll just ignore you. And again, that is the kind of arrogance that should really alarm anyone who cares about how our government functions. And without getting too ostensibly or too political here, I remember, we hear especially from supporters of President Trump talking about the deep state and how the deep state represents sort of this bureaucracy that exists to perpetuate itself and is basically untouchable. And I remember thinking, that's not really true. That's got to be hyperbole. That's got to be, my friends, it is absolutely real. And I once posted a picture of one of my favorite wild stallions. His name's Charger. He's a beautiful bay pinto that lives on the Onaki Range in Utah, standing in a water hole. And my post said, I never believed in the deep state until I tried saving wild horses from the Bureau of Land Management. Absolutely true. This is an agency that is just completely out of control, and views itself as untouchable, and views itself as beholden to certainly not the taxpayers. It holds itself as beholden to what it considers to be its stakeholders, which of course is the livestock industry. Yeah, it's, and again, that's the value of Ashley's movie, is it really calls out the Bureau of Land Management's bad behavior and bad information and outright lies. It's like, we've got to get to a tipping point where the tide begins to turn. And I believe that this movie represents the beginning of that turning around spot for us.
Well, I know that going back to what you were talking about, there was a congressional staffer that I met with while we were in Washington, DC. And I said to her, similar to what you're saying, I said, I don't understand. It doesn't matter if it's the National Park Service that I'm here talking to you about, the Bureau of Land Management, whatever it is. How do we how does the taxpaying public get through the iron gates that are surrounding the Department of the Interior, and who are they answering to? And she said, this is a very broken system because they're supposed to answer to the taxpaying public. And she said things like, an oversight committee, like you talked about, is something that needs to be looked at, and what they're doing and why they're not answering the taxpaying public. We have the same problem with the Park Service. They don't answer anything. They don't answer questions. If reporters report negatively about them, they don't respond to them anymore. We had all that American Wild Horse campaign stuff come out about GhanaCon and how they've been permanently sterilizing our horses. When the reporter who covered the story asked them, they said they have no comment. That's not acceptable. You permanently sterilized our mares, and there was talk about taking some of them out of the park back to Colorado State University to continue to be experimented on. And you're giving every female horse 8 months old and up GhanaCon. You have to answer some questions. So that's how our rally started, is that the regional director is going to come into Medora that week, and we're hoping that he'll stop by the rally because he agreed to a listening session. So we thought we'd give him one.
Well, I mean, and at the same time that our Save Our Wild Horses conference was going on in Washington, DC, that same weekend, you had the Public Lands Council having their conference. The Public Lands Council is made up of all of the ranchers and livestock companies and multinational corporations that graze livestock on our public lands. And isn't it interesting that Tracy Stone Manning, the director of the BLM, met with them, right. met with the Public Lands Council, but our request that she come meet with us to talk about many of the same issues was completely ignored. Right. And so, it just shows you what we're up against. We are not wealthy livestock companies. We are not, JBS, the Brazilian meat company. We are not Smithfield, the Chinese meat company. Those are the kind of, it's quite illuminating, isn't it, that foreign companies like JBS from Brazil and Smithfield from China can get an audience with our federal government's representatives, but American taxpayers who are actually paying their salaries can't. That's where we're at. And it's outrageous and it's unbelievable, but that's where we're at. And so we have to just keep on fighting and keep banging that war drum.
Someone asked, where's the event rally at the end of June, and what event is it again? That's something that they're trying to do a congressional screening, correct, for Congress. I don't know if you want to talk about that one more time. They don't have anything firm yet. They're still trying to work out those details, but.
Right. Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, we had originally had a tentative plan for earlier in June to do the congressional screening, but the logistics weren't coming together. So it'll be later in the month. And we don't have all the details nailed down, but once we do, we of course will make that available. And like I said, the rally would probably, I think will be at the Bureau of Land Management's headquarters. Would be where the rally is, and then of course the movie itself will be seen by members of Congress, and it'll be the movie itself is probably going to be an invitation only event because we want to make sure there's plenty of room for members of Congress since they're the ones that really need to see the movie. But what we hope is that around that same time. That we can get advocates to just blast the trailer and the hashtag I Stand With Wild Horses to their members of Congress, so that we can really raise the volume on this.
I think that's another way too that I try to explain to our followers, and I think a way for you to do it too. So you're going to be in Washington, D.C. at the end of June for the screening and for the rally. If I can't make it, you're my voice. So what can I do to help support you? And that's sharing the trailer, the hashtag I stand with horses. It seems small and it seems little, but when you have hundreds or thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, hopefully people doing this, it makes
Yeah.
a statement and it gets noticed.
The quote that I kept hearing at the conference that just stuck with me is, "But I'm only one person," said 300 million people.
Right.
I mean, it is so true. It is so true that that we think that we're just, what difference can I make because I'm just one person? Yeah, but you're one person, and so is everyone else who takes the time to speak out and to advocate. And eventually, like I say, we get to that tipping point and we start turning it around. And I want to say this too, that it's very unfortunate that among the enemies of the wild horses is the American media, the news media. And isn't it sad how they have utterly failed to accurately report on the plight of the American wild horse? I mean, the Bureau of Land Management puts out these press releases and these press statements to justify the helicopter roundups. And in every single one, they push this false narrative about there being an overpopulation of wild horses that is damaging the rangelands and that are in danger of starvation. And they put these statements out, and the news media tends to just take those media statements and press releases and just regurgitate them like they're news without asking a single question. The Bureau of Land Management says we need to round up 500 horses from this HMA because there's not enough forage to support them. And the news outlets just print that without saying, okay, but how many cattle and sheep are on that wild horse herd management area? That's the only question they really need to ask. How many cattle and sheep? That's the one question that the Bureau of Land Management does not want to be asked, because every single time the answer is way more cattle and sheep than there are wild horses. And I mean, 60 minutes, the sort of the quintessential investigative journalist show. They have one job, and that is to really investigate. And what did 60 Minutes do on the wild horse issue? They just parroted BLM's BS. and without doing any even attempt at investigative journalism. And I think all of us who saw that 60-minute piece, which was just basically a fluff piece for the BLM, were just like, seriously, even 60 Minutes is blowing this off? And so this is why I love working with journalists like Vickery Eckhoff, who wrote for years for the New York Times, and Cynthia Smoot, who is a longtime news anchor for Fox News down in Florida. I love having them involved in this issue, because they can provide sort of the background on what's going on with the media, and inform us and train us and give us helpful information on how to combat that. And so, by the way, if you haven't already, make sure and look at the Daily Pitchfork. That is the website put together by Vickery Eckhoff. And there are several articles that she has written that really talk about the reality of the ranchers and the livestock companies that are making a mint on our public lands with their cattle and sheep. They talk about the horse. She talks about the horse slaughter issue. Vickery has been steeped in the horse slaughter issue for probably for decades, actually, and just so combating what is happening in the world of journalism, and making sure that we seize every opportunity we can when we see bad reporting to call those reporters. And I've done this on my Wild Horse Wednesday. I did this on my local radio station just this week when I was asked. I call out the media for failing to report on this issue accurately and demanding that they start asking real questions of the Bureau of Land Management to get to the truth about what's really going on with these wild horse roundups and the mass incarcerations and so forth.
Do you think that it's worth it then, while people are hashtagging the trailer, to hashtag the media in that also? And members of
Absolutely.
Congress?
I mean, absolutely. I think it certainly can't hurt, you know, and but like, for example, I don't know, it's probably been a couple months ago. We had these two Wyoming state legislators calling, trying to get a resolution passed in the Wyoming legislature that called on the federal government to round up and slaughter Wyoming's wild horses. And the news station there just you know repeated what these two clowns were saying, which was just utter nonsense. I mean, utter nonsense what they were saying. And also, acting like those horses in Wyoming belong to them, not the American taxpayers.
Right.
And so I made a Wild Horse Wednesday video where I called out those two senators, but I also called out the news station for, if you're going to call yourself a news station, then do actual news reporting. Don't just repeat what someone says without saying, oh, by the way, can I ask a follow-up question?
Right.
I mean, that is the role, that is supposed to be the role of the news media. And they're just utterly failing. I mean, there are exceptions. There are some really good journalists out there, but they are in the minority. I mean, I think of Katie Weiss at Channel 4 CBS News in Denver. She's been a great journalist, and not because she's pro wild horse, but because she covers both sides of the issues. She asks hard questions of the Bureau of Land Management, and she asks hard questions of advocates like me. That's what news reporters are supposed to do. You're not
Right.
supposed to just be a content editor that gets an email from the BLM and shoots it out there on your website like it's actual news.
Right.
That's been a real a real confounding part of this whole problem, is trying to get the news media to accurately and truthfully report on this topic.
I know that when the park made their announcement in December, and they put out their own press release here for our horses, we kept waiting to hear any information on the news. And when we weren't hearing anything, I just started calling news stations, and I was like, are you aware the park just said they were eliminating all the horses? And you're right, it's confusing because, the park, for their NEPA process, gave their proposed action along with a no action alternative and a third alternative. So they said, well, no, there's three things they're considering. And I said, look at the line, says our proposed action. This is what we're doing. And the process tells them. So I think sometimes, if we can, doing what we can to reach out to the media, if we can get them to listen, like you said, that was something that I know I worked hard at here. And we have had a lot of our media here that have been really objective and are trying to talk to all different sides of the story too. But sometimes it's just picking up the phone and calling and saying, are you aware of what's happening? Because things aren't what they seem.
And I think, there is value in writing letters to the editor. If you see a newspaper give a biased, one-sided report, like, on this LA Times story about the horses that died, in California due to the severe weather, I'm hopeful, and maybe I'll be the one to do it, but someone needs to submit an op-ed in response to that and say, hey, wild horses died due to the terrible winter, as did a lot of other wild species. And, it's nonsense, to use that as some sort of pretext to round up wild horses.
Right.
It's just nonsense. I mean, it's like, a bunch of horses died due to the severe weather. Let's go round up some more. And they need to be called out on that kind of thinking for sure. And so, but identifying those opportunities to speak out, submitting letters to the editor, submitting, guest columns and opinion editorials, that's got to be a big part of our strategy.
I think that I know for sure, as I talked to more and more of our state legislators while we were going through the process for our state resolution. They did say that all the letters to the editor that were in the paper, they were taking note of that, and that's what really prompted them to take action. So absolutely, letters to the editor help. And I also want to say that I found this interesting, and I've heard this before, but it was just kind of confirmation. When I sat with Congressman Armstrong's office while we were in Washington, D.C., his congressional staffer told me he heard my radio. It was a radio talk show I was on in North Dakota. He heard that in Washington, D.C., and that's because I was talking about Armstrong and how he wasn't on board. So yeah, talking about them and letters to the editor, it all helps. I mean, I think, like you said, just attacking it from every angle is really important.
I mean, look, at this point, you know, the situation has grown into such a huge crisis that we can't afford not to use absolutely every tool at our disposal. Letters to the editor, calling the media out on their terrible reporting, staying in contact, regular contact with your members of Congress, all of it, using things like this movie Wild Beauty to spread the word. These are all tools that are available to us, and the horses cannot afford to have us not use every single one of those tools. So we are on the right side of this issue. We've got the truth on our side, and so while we may not have the funding, and we may not have the political influence, and we may not have the PR reach, we've got the truth, and we've also got the principles of compassion and kindness and good government and all of those things on our side. Those are all things, of course, that the government doesn't want to talk about, the beef industry doesn't want to talk about, the groups behind the path forward don't want to talk about. But that's what we should be talking about, because that's our strength.
And being loud, like, this isn't a time for silent advocacy. This is
Right.
bang the drum, be loud.
That's right. Absolutely.
Because no matter what, and I think that that's what people don't understand either. And I know there's a lot of confusion even here. These agencies are paid by our tax dollars. So there are no comments. They're telling us what they're going to do with our horses, like you said, is not acceptable. This is not, and especially in on Friday, we're going to have a horse talk with our town of Medora has our own Theodore Roosevelt. And I think it's going to be interesting because he knows a lot of the history and a lot of Roosevelt stuff, but in a national park named for our conservation president, this is happening. It's not okay.
You wonder what Teddy Roosevelt would say if he saw the government behaving this way, and if he saw what the government is proposing to do to these beautiful animals that are living in his namesake national park. I got to believe the guy would be just, I mean, we all, he was so pugnacious and such a fighter. He would have carried a big stick, but he would not have walked so softly. He would, I think he would be going to war for the wild horses for sure.
We'll find out Friday at 9:00. We're going to have a Zoom with him. So,
Yes.
one question that someone asked is, and I know that you've shared this, and I know Ashley has shared it, a list of where you can stream the movie.
Sure. Well, the best place to find it is on Amazon Prime. But it's on, like if you go to Comcast or Spectrum and all of those and type in the movie, it'll come up. I think on Prime right now it costs $4.99 to rent. Eventually it's going to be free, but we're very early in the process of the movie being released, and at this early stage the streaming services are going to be charging for it. But it's $5 is a small price to pay, and eventually I'm sure it will be free. But the film has won numerous awards. It's won Best Documentary at the Boston Film Festival and several others. It's an award-winning film, and I attended the screening, the Hollywood screening in Hollywood last week, and that was attended by, you know, actors and celebrities and you know, some very important people. And again, their response was the same as other audiences. They were outraged, and they wanted to know what they could do to help. And it's pretty amazing that by 11 o'clock the next morning after the LA screening, there were 6.5 million social media engagements, owing primarily to all of those, you know, celebrities and actors and social media influencers who blasted out after seeing that movie. But 6.5 million social media engagements, that is massive. That is huge.
Yes,
And that's
it
the
is.
that, you know, that's one of those nuggets of good news that we all need to just latch onto, because, you know, 6.5 million people made aware of the film and the message that before that probably had no idea.
Well, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Scott? This was great. Thank you. And really, everyone, like he said, watch the movie. When I post the video, I will put as many of the links that you guys have shared on where you can go. I think Apple Plus also was having it. I think that you can find it just about anywhere.
Yeah.
It's worth the money, it's worth the education, and it's worth just seeing. I know, like you said, it's hard with the roundups and things like that, but I know Ashley said in one of her interviews, she tried to make this as family friendly as she could, so she left a lot of the graphic stuff out, but what we
Yeah,
need to see is in there.
it's not overly graphic in terms of showing, you know, anything too graphic, but it shows the roundups,
Right.
which is important. People need to see what that looks like,
And what your tax
because
dollars are paying for.
yes, the Bureau of Land Management, you know, anytime there is a publicized death or injury or some sort of, you know, something bad that happens during a helicopter roundup, the first thing the BLM does is blast out a press release that says studies show that helicopter roundups of wild horses are humane. You know, it's you know, so it is out there intentionally gaslighting the American people. Don't believe what your own eyes are showing you. Believe us. You know, believe us when we tell you that your eyes are wrong and you are not really seeing what you're seeing. It's classic gaslighting, and the fact that it's being done by a federal agency that is mandated to humanely manage our wild horses living on public lands should just outrage all of us.
Right. I agree. Well, thank you again. And we'll look for you on Wednesday and keep us posted on what we can do to help. And thank you everyone for being here. And we will see you Friday. Like we said, we'll be talking to Theodore Roosevelt. And then next Sunday, we'll be talking to Ginger Fedek, who is here. And she's going to be talking about GhanaCon and its impact on the TRMP horses. So we have more of these coming. So we're starting to plan them all out. But I appreciate everyone being here. And Scott, thank you so much. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's a pleasure to join you, and greetings to all of you advocates out there. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.